Hello, L5 Adventures here. Today we're working on the 2009 Buick Enclave. We'll be changing 6 plugs and 6 coil packs. The vehicle came in with throwing a code of misfire in cylinder 2 and cylinder 3, so we're going to change all these out and see if that alleviates the problem. In order to get the engine cover off, you have to take off the oil cap. Make sure you replace that so nothing gets into the engine. I start off by taking 2 8mm screws off, or loosening them up to get the air intake off. There's also a small hose that's attached to the side of the intake that runs under the throttle body and is attached to the motor. That comes off nice and easy once you get it off the intake. There it is. The electrical connections on top, they're attached by one 10mm screw in the center of the intake, and there's another 10mm screw by the throttle body that you need to take off in order to get that off. The rest of the connections are attached to the intake by small plastic grommets that you can actually pull off by hand. There are a couple that are a little tougher to get off, so you need a tool that has an angle to it so you can pry them out. There's one 10mm screw. There's a second 10mm screw. They're the same size, so you can put them back in however you need to. Right now I'm checking and seeing where all the hoses go and the easiest spot to take them off in order to keep the hoses intact while I move them over. Right here I'm trying to get a connection that my screwdriver can't really reach, so I'll have to get another tool to get it off. This 10mm is for 3 screws that are on the motor on top of the intake that attach to the actual engine cover, just that plastic cover. These come off as well. There are, I think, 1 or 2 hoses that are attached to them with little plastic grommets. There's a PCV valve, taking that out, and then removing that other plastic grommet so I can move the electrical connection over. The electrical connections will swing to the left, and then this other hose that looks like a Y on top will swing to the right. Okay, this intake cover, intake shroud comes off. It's just a protector for the intake. There are 6 13mm screws that are in the intake that are holding it down. 5 of them are the same length, and the 6th one is a little bit shorter. It's under the electrical connection that's on the throttle body. What I'm taking off here is these electrical connections to this other sensor that's in the side of the throttle body. So I took that off and reconnected it to its connections, and it's moved to the side. Now I'm going to take off the throttle body in order to get that electrical connection. There's 4 10mm screws that are in the throttle body. Once you get those off, the throttle body just comes off. Just make sure you're mindful of the gasket. I removed that first, and then I took it off the electrical connection. The electrical connection is a little different. There's about 3 things you got to move out of the way for it to come off the actual throttle body. It took a little while to get it off, or for me to figure it out. Okay, now we're going to get the intake off by taking out those 6 13mm screws. So before I did anything else, I vacuumed out the valley and took out anything that could fall in the motor. Then I plugged them up and went about taking off the actual coil pack from the first plug. It's a 10mm screw, or 10mm bolt. The way you get off the coil pack from the actual plug is you have to slide the plastic piece over to, I think it's to the right, and then the plug will actually come off the coil pack, and then you're able to take off that 10mm bolt, remove the coil pack, and then remove the plug. I used a magnetic plug socket to get it out. Now the first two in the back were fine. The third one, the coil actually broke inside the cylinder. I had to use a pick set to get it out. So I ended up getting the rubber boot off the plug, and I eventually got the plug out, replaced it, and then put the new coil in, and then went about my day, or went about my business. Every time I put plugs in, I make sure to put on some anti-seize so it's easier for either me or the next person working on the vehicle to get those out. So once you do one, it's the same process for all 6. Alright, this I think this thumbs up. Yes, that thumbs up is from when I had to work on getting the rubber plug off the plug inside, and get that spark plug out and get the new plug in, the new coil in. So here I'm just replacing everything I took off in reverse order. So put the gasket back on, put the intake back on, put anti-seize on the 6 bolts that are going into the intake. Tighten these in a crisscross pattern, and then you torque them down afterwards. The torque specifications I think is 17 foot-pounds if I remember correctly. So in reverse order, I'm putting the throttle body back on. I made sure I attach the connector. When you're attaching the 10mm throttle body bolts, you don't have to tighten them down super tight, just enough. I'm putting back all the connections in the order I took them off. When working on a vehicle for the first time, I make sure to go over everything I've touched at least 2 or 3 times before I wrap it up. So you'll see me in the video a couple times. I'll touch everything at least 2 or 3 times and make sure everything's tight or secured or plugged in. Now we're putting the those 10mm bolts that attach to the actual engine cover back on. All the electrical connections going back in their specific spots. Put a zip tie on there to keep one of the connections closer to the other because it was broken before I moved it. So. And here I'm just changing out the air filter. It was a request later on after I contacted the owner of the vehicle. Just said to change it out. So I had my wife go get me one for the vehicle. The air cleaner bolts I think are T25s. Here I am double checking everything, making sure everything's good. Make sure everything's nice and secure. Put the engine cover back on, and we start her up and check her out.